Like I mentioned in our previous episode, textile waste is one of the biggest factors in the environment. We have landfills being filled up with used clothes that people don't know what to do with again. And for instance, your clothes, what do you do with them when you're done with them? Do you donate them to charity? Do you throw them out? What do you do with them? And that's one question a lot of entrepreneurs in this sustainable space are trying to answer. Today's guest on Greentech Pulse is Iris. Iris is from Everywhere Apparel, and they are doing something really unique with your old clothes. So what they do is basically, I'll give a small introduction. She's going to go deeper on it. They basically take they first of all do not use any virgin cotton, any freshly spun cotton. They take your old cotton clothes, process them, make new clothes. And when you're done with those clothes, you can scan those clothes, send them back to them, and they process them for the next person. Isn't that cool? Welcome to the show, Iris.
Thank you so much, Peter. It's awesome to be
Thank
here.
you so much. I was just so blown away thinking about your process and what you do generally in that space. So, what actually got you there, first of all, before we talk about what you do? Because I'm curious.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, well, I love fashion. I'm like a huge fashion nut. I love buying clothing. I love wearing clothing, styling clothing. And so I think growing up, knowing I wanted to work in this field and be a fashion designer, but also seeing that we can't continue operating this industry in the way we have led me to actually be an entrepreneur. And so I've been starting businesses in the sustainable fashion space for over a decade. And about 4 or 5 years ago, joined with my partners in Everywhere. And what we're really trying to tackle is end of life textile and apparel waste, because apparel is usually people move through clothing really quickly. At least in the United States, each American generally gives or throws away about 80 pounds of clothing per year. So it's a high rate of accumulation. And meanwhile, all of the brands are producing, billions and, pieces of new clothing. So it's just, we have a big problem with sort of the amount of clothing we make and then the lack of infrastructure to actually handle that clothing after it's done being worn. Um, so seeing that waste problem as a designer, I studied design. As I mentioned, I always wanted to be a fashion designer. I love making clothing. It led me to want to just address that problem so that we can provide designers with sustainable materials, sustainable products to print their artwork on, to really enable creativity in this like more sustainable way.
Interesting. So now, when you talk about, I know I made it, I gave a spoiler. So, but tell us what you do. Tell us what Everywhere does. Tell us how you do what you do, making the fashion chain more sustainable, the fashion supply chain more sustainable.
Totally, yeah. So a lot of what we do is source waste streams. So there's a few dominant types of textile waste. One of them is post-consumer. So that's the waste that we're probably most familiar with. It's clothing that's been worn, used, either donated to a thrift store or ends up in a landfill, which over 80% of clothing ends up in a landfill at the end of its life. There's also manufacturing waste. So there's a lot of waste that's developed as you make clothing, which is something that people don't normally see, but can be upwards of 20-30% of the raw materials you're using can end up as waste just through the manufacturing process. So our process starts with waste collection. Most of the waste that we use today is from manufacturing waste streams, but we also do a lot of sourcing of post-consumer and dead stock apparel. So we have a lot of brands approach us who have an overstock of garments from like a past season or something that didn't sell, and they're looking for a solution for what to do with that material. So we take those waste streams, combine them, process them, and respin them into new yarn. And from there, our process is very, simple. It's pretty much how you would make any other piece of apparel. We knit, cut, sew the garment back into a t-shirt, a hoodie, whatever it is. We have a catalog of products that's very basic. And then we release those products into the market. And like you mentioned, they all have QR codes on them that you can scan to send it back and also learn about the sustainability information on that product. So a lot of our customers are brands, actually. They're brands who are buying our materials or buying our products and then putting their logo on it or their artwork on it. And so we are kind of like the sustainable foundation for their brand. So it's kind of nice. We're like we power other brands in this sustainable way with better materials and better products.
So now looking at you said your stock is mostly from manufacturing waste and let's say the oversold, the overstock and stuff like that. So let's say you get maybe a bill or whatever of maybe shirts like this. So what you do basically, what would, let's say you
Hmm.
get a shipment of shirts like this. What do you do with them?
Yeah, yeah, totally. So first, we do have to remove certain components. So for example, like the screen printing, that actually has to be cut out of a garment because the ink itself is plastic, which some is something that people don't know very much about. But screen printing ink can be PVC, and it can be actually quite toxic. So that part gets cut out. It still gets shredded down, so the logo gets destroyed, but we can't actually make this into new fabric. Similarly, stuff like hardware, like pieces like this, little labels, they have to be cut out. So when we would receive a bale like that, we would do some detrimming first. From there, we can take the material we've salvaged and it goes into a really large shredding machine. And the shredding machine, it has like 8 or 9 stages that grind the fabric into like finer and finer fiber until it actually becomes respinnable again. So it's a combination of just manually cutting out different components of the garment and then using a shredder that is designed to make like very fine textile fibers. The other thing when we get like a bale is we do have to look at the material content. So we have to separate out, for example, like polyester garments from cotton garments and blends from cotton garments. So that process right now is fairly manual, but there are scanners that can be used. The scanners detect the percentage of polyester in the garment. And we think that over the next 5, 10 years, there'll be a lot more innovation in this area, automation of sorting clothing by textile material content. But that's another part of the process when we receive like a raw bale of clothing. Um, but yeah, it's actually a lot of our used clothing ends up in West Africa, and particularly in Ghana. There are very large marketplaces, of where all this textile product is going and ending up, through large brokers that are kind of buying clothing by the container. um, yeah, it's a big problem. I've never been to see them, but I will be traveling to Africa later this year and hope to stop by like
Yeah, I
Ghana and
think
West
I
Africa.
read a couple of was it weeks ago where I read about a land I think where they said this secondhand clothing was causing landfill issues because a lot of them they send are not resellable and then they try to trash them and most of the time they try to trash them maybe by
Yes.
the sea or something and then it's piled up and it's causing its own problem there. But I think the used garment industry
Hmm.
is actually a really big industry around even where I am currently. Yeah, even in
Yeah,
Nigeria too.
totally.
So now okay, you mentioned separating polyester blends from the cotton. So why do you use only cotton? Why don't you use those other materials?
Yeah, so for us, it's really for sustainability reasons. When you use plastic or synthetic fibers in clothing, what happens is the fibers are so small that when you wash the garment, they actually shed into the water. And there's a lot more consciousness today about what microplastics are, and polyester fibers are effectively microplastics. So For this reason, we filter out synthetic materials from our process because ethically we don't feel like we should be creating more garments out of synthetic fibers. Now, synthetic fibers have a lot of performance benefits. They wick sweat, they're good for doing sports. Um, but we really need to, figure out how to innovate with those fibers in a way that doesn't continue to harm the planet. And unfortunately, microplastics, they have adverse medical impacts for humans and for animals. So it's just, yeah, it's not a great thing to be like eating so much plastic. And I think one of the statistics that we found is that we're basically eating like a credit card of plastic a week, just with the amount of microplastics that are in our water
Wow,
and our
wow,
food.
wow. I think you went a bit deeper on microplastics because nine, episode 9 of the podcast was about microplastics. And all this while I have a lot of clothes. I think this is a polyester blend too. And I never ever thought of them as a source of microplastics. So thinking about it this time, yeah,
Yeah, yeah, it's very hidden. Yeah.
because they're just everywhere.
Yeah, and so microplastics, they're everywhere. They're also in the air. So when you even just like abrading a garment, it can shed microplastics in the air. You can breathe them in. So it's breathing them in, it's drinking them, it's eating them through fish and other food. But yeah, they're everywhere, and I think they've been proven to show that it causes endocrine disruption in human bodies. So I think we're only at the tip of the iceberg understanding what
Yeah.
microplastics are doing to our
Yeah,
health.
okay. So I think so anyone who wants to learn more about microplastics, episode 9. That's like 30 minutes on microplastics. So now when you talked about the process when you get a bill, you talked about removing the screen printing because of the inks and everything in that, and also taking off the hardware, that's the buttons, the zips, and embroidery and whatever. So that sounds like a really manual and long process, especially when you consider the size of maybe a container or whatever. So doesn't that make the final product, to what extent more expensive does it make the final product than maybe getting a normal virgin cotton?
Yes, yeah, you're exactly right. All of those processes add cost until we have real automation in the detrimming and reverse logistics of picking up and processing clothing waste. The process, will be more expensive than using virgin cotton. But there are other costs involved that are not as obvious. So when we work with brands, for example, they're actually paying for warehouse space to store a lot of this waste. So they're paying monthly by the pallet. They're actually incurring regular costs for this. So over time, those costs may offset any increase in the actual unit cost of the recycled product. But the other thing to keep in mind too is that over the next 10, 15, 20 years, whatever it might be, however quickly climate change goes, the regions where we'll be able to grow cotton efficiently are going to diminish. And the resources needed to grow cotton, such as fresh water, those supplies are also diminishing in certain regions. So for this reason, the price of virgin cotton, we believe, is going to go up further. And so over time, there will be cost parity as the automation of processing used clothing, gets better. And then as climate change, unfortunately, pushes us to use land differently and use our natural resources differently. So at the moment, you're right, recycling clothing is more expensive. But I think over the next 10 years,
Yeah,
that'll
and I
start to
think
even out.
what you mentioned is the truth. Maybe automation, having something that can just pick them up, sense whatever is on it, remove the parts where that are not needed, and push them out. So now I think that
Mm-hmm.
brings me to my next question. You've been doing this for a couple of years, and I know you've probably met a lot of challenges. I know this automation you mentioned is one of the challenges. So, what challenges did you meet trying to get this business, this idea from paper or from your head into the factories?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big challenges has been just the fast fashion landscape. So the way that people are used to buying and seeing so many new clothes on such a regular basis is not normal. But at this point, consumers are kind of used to that. So we've been conditioned to consume clothing in a very high turnover way. And so I think that's a huge challenge. Also, just competing with companies that are releasing so many new products and are so agile. So that's part of why like our strategy has been partially based on working with those brands because I think companies like H&M or Shane, they know that their products are not resaleable. They are kind of one-time use. And then maybe the side breaks open, you can't use it anymore. So we're actually looking for opportunities to collaborate with those companies while we also build our own sustainable products. But I think the way that people consume fashion today, it's gotten very toxic from a mindset standpoint. And however, there's more and more people because of like social media that are aware of the negative impacts of fast fashion, and so that's actually helped drive more sustainable consumers towards what we're
Yeah,
doing.
and I think social media is actually a big part of the way we consume fashion these days because a lot of times you go in some circles and they say you shouldn't be seen out in the same clothes twice, and you're like, okay, if I wear this, how does that
Yeah,
work out?
yeah, that's crazy. Yeah,
Does that work
yeah,
out?
yeah. But you can like reinvent your clothes too. Like there's a lot of upcycling happening now. Like how do you take a garment you've already worn, re-dye it, add a new patch on it, like change it? How can we make the life cycle of a garment last longer? And there's like reworking, upcycling, obviously reselling a garment before you actually recycle it is important because if it's in a condition where someone else can wear it first, that's great. That could double the life cycle of that product. So I think it's really about like, promoting those trends where people can like reuse a garment, rewear it in a different way, pass it off to a friend, um, make that life cycle a little bit longer.
So I think anyone who feels guilty about wearing clothes twice and all that, you've heard the different ways you can maybe feel less guilty. You can rework the clothes, you can upcycle the clothes, you can resell them, or even give them out to a friend or whoever. But so one thing people do when they feel this guilt I just talked about is that they probably look for clothes, maybe off the label and of the rack and all that, where they have the eco-friendly label. So, is there anything about this eco-friendly label normally that would surprise most people who buy clothes with the label with that tag?
Yeah. Yeah, so I think you'd be surprised. The standards in the fashion industry are actually really low. So most brands will do like the bare minimum, to be able to greenwash and market something as a sustainable product. So one thing to really look for is what is the percentage of material that's actually this sustainable, that the brand is making a sustainability claim off of? Because what I've seen sometimes is even looking at recycled products, a brand, the title will be like recycled hoodie, but then when you look in the product description, it's 30% recycled cotton, the rest of it is virgin cotton. And so I think there's like there's a lot of leeway for brands to greenwash pretty blatantly. And so I think it's important that people really read the fine print, read the label, the actual material content. If there is a tag on it that is claiming something about the fiber, to actually go and research that fiber. But just as a general rule, and when we think about like recyclability of clothing, I think something people should know is that clothing that is made of one material is way more recyclable than a blended material. So polyester cotton, unfortunately, requires a lot more effort and cost to recycle because you actually have to split the plastic from the cellulosic fiber versus a 100% cotton garment is much easier to recycle. I mean, we can take that back and recycle it very easily. So, and also 100% polyester is much easier to recycle than a blend. So that's something to keep in mind just generally as a consumer, to be mindful of. Is it a blended material or is it a mono material? Because mono materials are much easier to process when they're done being worn.
I think one thing I've picked from this episode is actually looking much more closely at the labels of whatever I'm wearing. Very important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. And there's new labeling like standards and laws. So in Europe, they're now requiring like a digital component of the label, so that you can actually get much more information about the product than what you can print on a tag. Because those tags are like not very big, and most people when they buy clothing, they'll rip the tag out, cut the tag out after, and then they lose all the data about the product. So there are some other companies that are working on that, like how do we um, give consumers that data upfront, and how do we help them retain it over time?
Okay, so now there's something I mentioned in the beginning in the introduction, and something you've also mentioned, which is the circular economy. So some of our listeners might be hearing about that for the first time. So can you just make it easier for them to understand what a truly circular fashion economy looks like compared to what we have here now?
Mm, yeah. So what we have now, I would call a linear supply chain. So it's very extractive. The first step is sourcing a raw material, and then the process goes from that sourcing to bringing a product to a retail store or bringing it to market, and then that's it. There's no further tracking or monitoring of the product after it's sold in a retail store. So that's a very linear model. In a circular model, what we're trying to do is reclaim products at end of use, and really look at them, evaluate them, and see how we can use them as raw material inputs in the same supply chain. So circularity is really about reclaiming materials and using them as a raw input into making that same product. And in clothing, we call that textile to textile recycling. And it means you're taking a textile and you're turning it back into an item of the same or greater value, which is another textile product.
So no, I think I just got a question from the description of the circular economy and how your product works. Okay, you probably get from a manufacturer, you make clothes. I wear the clothes, I send them back. You make new clothes. The person wears them, sends them back. Then you make new clothes again. Is there an end to this cycle? Is there a point where you can no longer use these things, where you have waste products? And what do you do with those waste products, if there are any?
Great question. The answer right now is yes, but again, as with a lot of the automation, the sorting, we're hopeful that over time there will be chemical innovations that will allow us to like take very small waste fibers and reform them or strengthen them so that they can continuously be used again. But right now, like you can't, just recycle something over and over and over again. The reason is because the fiber loses strength. And that also exists in different types of materials like paper, even plastic. When you shred and recycle plastic, it becomes weaker. Um, but there are a few interesting companies in this space that are working on problems such as how do we take super, super small recycled materials and make them longer. And so there are processes that we can use to strengthen those fibers. Um, but right now, to be totally honest with you, there is so much waste on the planet that we are so far from from hitting that problem, because just the sheer amount of material that we have available, even like high quality manufacturing waste to recycle. And even on the return side, we typically see like a 10 to 15% return rate. So it's not even like a super high quantity that's getting returned. It's mostly because people aren't aware of these circular systems yet. So hopefully over time, we'll see that percentage go up where people will start returning more stuff. Um, but I think it's a combination of um, not seeing as, people not being used to what to do with clothes at end of life. Um, and also just, not having so much waste that we're not even close to needing to deal with that problem yet,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
So I think now another question I'll ask is you're in a field where you're doing what isn't the norm, what isn't the normal thing to do, and that means you're going to need a lot of research and development, R&D, and we all know that's really expensive because you've mentioned two areas where processing of the materials when they come in that needs automation, that needs R&D, that's is going to be
Hmm.
expensive. Then reducing the waste, researching how to strengthen those fibers that have lost their strength and all that. That's a lot
Yeah,
of research too.
totally.
That's expensive. So how are you
Yes.
able to balance environmental sustainability with environmental sustainability with business sustainability and profitability with all these things in place?
That's a great question. And I think it's the question that every sustainable technology company is trying to figure out right now. Because on the one hand, it's like, should our governments be paying for this? Should regulations be forcing manufacturers to pay for this? Right now, there's really a question of like, who's going to pay for this? Should it be coming from private funding sources? So what we are seeing that's very exciting is there are new regulations around this. So there's, laws that are holding different entities in this supply chain accountable. So there is one new law, and I'm going to speak from the perspective of an American because I'm actually based in California. We have a new law around textile waste that is requiring any brand or manufacturer, they're actually going to start paying fees to cover textile waste processing for products that end up in California. So um, that really helps companies like ours. Regulation is super helpful. There's also bans in Europe. There's bans on burning clothing. So that's kind of forcing brands to look at recycling solutions, pay for recycling. So this is the kind of pressure that is really fueling a company like ours. I think the other thing that is a part of our strategy and that is the basis for our business is we sell sustainable clothes, and there's a growing audience, especially like Gen Z, younger consumers that really do care, and they really are looking into every fine print detail of these garments that they're asking their parents to buy them, or maybe they buy them with their mom's credit card or something. So we've helped larger brands create collections that are specifically geared towards a more conscious consumer. So that consumer base is also growing. So it's kind of both. We're both driven by these regulations that are helping us with larger brand partnerships, and also by just like a growing category of more sustainably minded consumers.
Okay, so I think that's an interesting one. So you have both the distant regulations, like the one in California, and all that. You have the new generation, who is interested in, like you said, who they look at the details of everything they buy. And you mentioned something earlier that there are a lot of brands who greenwash, who probably maybe have 3% cotton and say they are eco-friendly and all that. So how do consumers who aren't as savvy as maybe this Gen Z and co, how do they spot genuine sustainable fashion compared to the greenwashing you talked about?
Yeah, I mean, well, people are very smart these days. I mean, we have all the information accessible at our fingertips, and so I think, and we're constantly getting all these messages like from social media. Even if we're not realizing it as we're scrolling it, we're like, ingesting all this information. So I think that people are smarter than we think. Like the average consumer is getting much, much smarter. Um, I think that certifications really help. So looking for brands and companies that have actually gone through the hoops of getting some of these sustainability certifications. So, for example, our company, we follow the Global Recycled Standard, which is the main textile standard for recycled goods. And you can look for similar certifications, even in like other products like wood. There's FSC certified products. So looking for the right standards, making sure the company has those audits if you want to go really deep. And then, yeah, I think, you know, right now it's not a requirement that every company disclose their carbon footprint, but the companies that do are further ahead. Um, and you can look at, if if the brand is more transparent, they're talking more about their supply chain, sharing content on their supply chain, maybe even like email the brand, ask them directly, for more information on their supply chain. We have customers do that with us all the time. You can really go deep, probably not with like an H&M or like a large retailer like that, but with a medium-sized brand, you'd be surprised. Like the brands are willing to talk with their consumers and learn from their consumers. So I think if you ever have doubts, make sure you do your research and even reach out
Yeah. So
directly
what
to
are
the
those?
company.
What are some of these certifications you talked about again? So they can look out for that.
Yeah. Yeah. So in clothing, it's the global recycled standard. And then there's also the recycled content standard. And both of those are looking at recycled content in apparel. So very important, recycled fibers are actually the lowest impact fibers on the planet. So they are considered the most sustainable fibers. There's also GOTS certification, which is an organic cotton standard. So there's different certifications for organic cotton that you can look at too. And then there's other, types of labor audits like fair trade is a big one, sort of more for like working conditions and those types of audits. So yeah, those are just some of the top
So I
ones.
think that's actually enough for a lot of people looking. So you have the global recycle standard, the recycled content standard, the certifications for organic cotton, the labor audits, and cool. Yeah, so at least
Yep.
that alone is a lot, and you'll probably be able to make a lot of headway judging what you're buying. Yeah, what you're
Yeah.
consuming.
Yeah. And you'd be surprised. Those standards are very, very strict. So if you see like one of those logos on a hang tag or on a product, it means the company has gone through all those steps. They're very stickler about, not allow you can't use those logo marks unless you have actually been certified. So they're very trustworthy. Yeah, exactly. Eco-friendly, yeah. Probably not the best marketing claim. Beware of that one. Yeah.
All right. So now for your business, Everywhere Apparel, what's next for Everywhere Apparel? What should we expect? What's coming next?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've been doing a lot of music tours. Music merchandise is a super high volume area. When you see like an artist, for example, like Drake on tour, like Drake is buying 100,000, garments to sell on one tour leg. So it's a huge volume of material. And we have some deep inroads into the music industry. So we've been working with big artists like Chapel Rowan, who's really popular, at least here in the US, among others like Wilco and Tame Impala. And so what's exciting is I think this year we'll see some big traction in the music industry. So hopefully you see our garments more on tour if you ever go to watch concerts or go to live music events and festivals. And the other thing that we're doing for those artists is actually anything they don't sell on the tour or anything that comes back, we will take that material back and help them make it into merch for the next tour for next year. So that's one thing we're really working on in our physical products business. And then on the brand side, we're hoping to expand our brand partnerships and also work with new types of materials. So what we've seen is that brands, it's not just textile waste they have all different types of waste. And what they're looking to do is build like a zero waste strategy around their business. And so we have some really exciting projects in the works, actually working with non-textile materials. And so hopefully you'll see those in the wild. There's a project we're launching in the United States. It's actually a furniture product. So it has nothing to do with clothing. But furniture is actually a great application for shredded textile fiber. So we can take apparel waste and turn it into other types of products as well. It doesn't have to be textiles. So that's something we're getting into also
That
this
means you're
year.
going from Everywhere Apparel to probably Everywhere Everything. Yeah. Okay. So now, for listeners who have been inspired by this conversation, they now know what to look out for for an eco-friend, for a real sustainable fashion brand and everything. What's one step you would say they should take today to be more sustainable, especially fashion wise?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, first step I think is look at what you have. If there are creative things to rewear, reuse what you already have, that's like to me the best starting point. And I think the other thing I would recommend is if you want to get rid of something, maybe look beyond just donating it to a thrift store. Um, Maybe look at resale platforms first. Like, can you post it on Depop or eBay? Then you also get some value out of it as well. Or can you work directly with a recycler? So there are companies like ours. We actually have a mailer on our website that you can get and just put clothing in it and send it back to us. So before you give something away, just like think about what the options are before just dropping it off at Goodwill, which is what we have here in the US. Goodwill or Savers. Unfortunately, those thrift stores, they only resell 60% of the clothes they receive because they receive a lot of clothes that are like not in wearable condition. So that is not really a solution for recycling.
From my research earlier, so I realized most of the clothes, like you mentioned, that end up in West Africa come from all those places too. A lot of the time.
They do, yeah, because when Goodwill can't resell something, what they do is they auction it off to people who are buying them by the container load, and at that point, you lose traceability completely. So that container could go
Yeah.
anywhere.
So now, okay, for maybe brands who want to work with you for to get sustainable fabrics, for maybe music tours, for consumers, or maybe people who have clothes and they want to get that mailer you talked about to send their clothes to you to do your thing with them. What's the best way people can reach out to you and continue this conversation?
Yeah, totally. Well, you can visit our website, everywhereapparel.com. And then you can also find us on social media. Hey, sorry. You can find us on social media as well. Our handle is very easy. It's just at everywhere. That's it, at everywhere. So, yeah, Google us, Everywhere Apparel, or everywhereapparel.com is probably the
Amazing.
best
So
way.
everywhereapparel.com, that'll be on the show notes, that'll be on the screen. And if social media is your thing, everywhere on social media. Okay, that sounds. All right. So thank you so much, Iris. I really enjoyed this conversation. I learned a lot, and I think at least I know what to look out for from any brand I'm buying. I know I should probably be more conscious of polyester and blends and try to wear one material. I've learned a lot, and I'm sure that anyone listening will learn a lot from this episode. So thank you so much for coming up and sharing your knowledge, your wisdom, your experience with us today. Thank you. And for the listeners, I hope you learned as much as I did. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. If you know anyone else who would benefit from this, share this to them. Until next week when we're back with a new episode. Bye for now.